So, Ramesh, you have a new op-ed in the Washington Post entitled "Trump's Indictment Will Warp Our Politics for Years to Come." And in it, you write in part this: short of being written on Biden campaign letterhead, this indictment could hardly be more nakedly political. Just as Trump repeatedly urged legal action against his enemies, Bragg campaigned on his willingness to pursue the ex-president in court. It's the long-term effect on our politics that is most worrisome. If a prosecution that even some of Trump's critics consider a stretch brings him down, then we can expect more dubious prosecutions of politicians in both parties. That's not the death and destruction that Trump, with characteristic irresponsibility, forecast as a result of an indictment. It is rather decay and decline and accelerated loss of trust and trustworthiness in our political and legal systems. And that is definitely something we have talked about a lot. It is a concern. It's a real concern. But if this former president committed a crime in any of the cases against him, what's the other option?
Well, I certainly think that if you've got a strong case against the president, or an ex-president in this case, then that should be pursued. What I think is really damaging is the possibility of bringing a case involving novel legal theories, which, you know, a lot of people who are very critical of Trump have deep misgivings about. I think that's a different story when you're stretching the law because you really want to get this particular defendant. And I think that, you know, again, as a number of people have said this morning, we don't know the details of this indictment and won't for several hours. But if it's anything like what has been extensively reported on in the New York Times and other places, this looks like a very shaky case.
Yeah, and Ramesh, just for people that are viewers, just so they know, you believe the Georgia case is much stronger. You believe, if I'm not mistaken, you believe the documents case, the Mar-a-Lago the obstruction part of that case is much stronger. So your objection is not to crossing that line, which I've always been very concerned about ex-presidents being indicted. But your concern is not so much that, even though that's a terrible line to cross, if you have to cross, you have to cross it. Your concern is, like, again, what I've heard from a lot of people on the left, your concern is if D.A. Bragg comes forward with this novel legal theory, if it is a novel legal theory, a lot of ifs here, again, in a jurisdiction where Donald Trump may have gotten 11, 12, 13% of the vote.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and again, right, the fact that it's a very blue Democratic jurisdiction, look, if he really did break the law there and you've got a strong case, then, you know, maybe that's a problem, but I think you have to go ahead with it anyway. But if, on the other hand, it's a question of, look, I promised the voters I'm going to get this guy, and I'm just going to look for a way to get him, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, then I think you've got something very different. And I do think that there is a kind of straight line from Trump himself and the kind of lock-her-up politics that he's practiced for his entire career and what we're seeing now on the left.
Ramesh, a lot of people look at the indictment of, like, for example, John Edwards. Had he been a former president, would that have been an indictment you would not have agreed with?
Well, I think that it was a weak case, as it actually turned out. You know, jurors agreed. So I don't think that was. So I think it's actually kind of the same thing. It's not that he's an ex-president. It's that this is a weak case, or at least it has all of the appearance of being a weak case.
Ramesh, in the end, is it going to matter the order of his indictments? I mean, you know, obviously we don't even know what the charges are that we're going to hear about at 2:15, much less whether he gets indicted in Georgia, whether he gets indicted by the special prosecutor. But if I were a betting person, I'd say that at least one of those other investigations is probably likely to produce something. And in the end, is the order going to be important at all, or is it still important in your view, even if he gets indicted in what you would see as more important cases?
So let's say that, as you're suggesting, that there are other cases that are brought, and let's say that those are stronger cases. Then I think you could argue this either way. You could say, in a way, people are sort of conditioned into thinking, well, it's okay to prosecute a former president, and the multiplicity of the charges actually helps. On the other hand, you could say the weakness of the New York case sort of colors the public perception and the public debate and makes it all look like, well, these are his enemies out to get him. I'm not sure which of those effects predominate, but I am sure that prosecutors ought to be careful and exercise some self-restraint rather than bringing charges that don't hold up.
Ramesh, we've been talking on this show for quite some time about how my former party, the Republican Party, can't seem to help itself. They move towards Donald Trump, even though it's been pretty devastating for the party since 2017 to have Trump and Trump-like candidates running. We saw a CNN poll out yesterday that Willie talked about today. 62% of independents support this indictment, of course, with a caveat: they don't know what the indictment is, which again, you could write a column on that alone. But I'm wondering, do you see what many of us see, and that is a Republican Party that seems to be split between people. Some people at the National Review, some people at other conservative outlets, certainly the Republican establishment, a lot of thought leaders in the Republican Party wanting to move away from Donald Trump, perhaps more towards Ron DeSantis or another candidate, and yet the base of the party still pulling them back to Trump and setting up another possible general election loss.
Well, I think there's no question that a very, very significant chunk of Republican voters still see Donald Trump as their champion. And the scenario that a lot of people had hoped for, including me, that Trump would just sort of fade as a political presence and voters would be wanting to move on. I think that's been shown not to be true. I mean, this is going to be a real fight, and Trump can't be counted out for the Republican nomination. I'd say he can't be counted out for winning the presidency altogether in November of 2024.
Nope. National Review's Ramesh Ponnuru, thank you very much for your insight this morning.
Thanks so much, Ramesh, for being here. We greatly appreciate it.